So I'm going to do a really quick video also about what should have happened, what the processes should have been with gender recognition, certification, and the inclusion of trans and equality legislation. Now, most of the rights that are involved in equality legislation and safeguarding legislation, and most of the shape of those systems has actually evolved through crisis over about 70 years. And what we have developed is systems whereby we understand now that we're identifying new vulnerabilities and that we have to provide protections, and we have processes by which we do that. Now, what was supposed to happen, and what normally would have happened, is gender recognition certificates came into existence. Trans was included in equality legislation, and through a process of quite manageable, everyday, normal, very normal. When I say crisis here, I don't mean major crisis. I mean, what would have happened is over a period of about 5-6 years, those rights would have become embedded within the wider framework, because with each incident, with each, with a woman in a mental health, a woman who's committed being unable to share a room with a male-bodied person, or, some domestic abuse shelters, some rape crisis centres, different groups would have come into view as trans rights kind of pressed against those, and we would have made decisions, and then over a period of 5 or 6 years, not only would trans rights have matured, not only would the gender recognition certificate have embedded more securely, but we would have also developed frameworks and mechanisms for the constant evolution of these frameworks, because these are constantly evolving frameworks. And that's not really a new process. We didn't come up with race legislation and disability legislation and sex discrimination legislation at the same time. They came in a process over a period of time. This was part of that process. And one of the things that's really important to understand is the disciplines who have told trans people that their rights meant what Twitter is saying they meant are the ones who didn't know this. So what they have done is they've used trans as a cudgel to hide from the fact that they don't know about these systems, and they've taken what is an actual population with is a very tiny population, but with many discrete, tiny, and some very vulnerable populations, and they've gone, look, we've got a cudgel that means that we don't have to learn about these systems, and they've told some very, very vulnerable people that actually their rights include what's now on Twitter. And so you have people screaming, absolutely. I think it was Ros Cavini who said that basically any discussion of safeguarding was now anti-trans. And so what they have done is they have created this toxic situation. Luckily, it's sealed itself into a chat room on Twitter, and we're kind of all out of it. But this now has to play out. And all this really was, the end point doesn't change, except the end point does change now, because male pattern abusive behaviour and risk has been demonstrated. And when risk is demonstrated in a debate about safeguarding, that completely changes the situation, because that behaviour has to be noted. And so this situation is going to grow, but that's the situation that should have happened. It should have been a normal legislation happened here, a series of minor crises over several years, which would further embed and mature those rights. And instead, the gender recognition certificate has now been already used to absolve male violence. But The Guardian have told, attempted murderers and prolific paedophiles that a gender recognition certificate makes them a marginalised woman. It doesn't. A gender recognition certificate could not simultaneously be issued to a sex offender and be automatic access to a space of safety from male violence, and certainly not while the activism is about threatening women and telling lesbians that their sexuality changes. That was never on the cards. So what women have to do now, and what women have been forced into a position to do, is to say, actually, these laws already existed and it was your job to know them, and we're now getting threatened and abused because of the conversation that you're having, that you have had, and because of the expectations you have given these people. But what's also been lost is the opportunity. That's gone now. The process that was supposed to be occurring right now was the gradual embedding of trans rights. Well done to Paris Lees, Sean Fay, Ros Cavini, and the rest of you. Well done. You've just kissed goodbye to that. And we can't do anything about it. And now you want to attack everybody for knowing it. This is an absolute mess.